The Honorable Wayne R. Monroe now serves as the Minister of National Security in the Davis Cooper administration, and on October 4th, 2023, was appointed Leader of Government Business in the House of Assembly. Prior to being elected as a Member of Parliament for the Freetown constituency, he was the principal in the firm of Monroe and Associates. He's a noted civil litigator and is known for his innovative approach to litigation. He was often sought after for complex and groundbreaking cases and was known to excel in cases of first impression. He's a father of 7 children and walks in the Christian faith in the Anglican tradition and is a member, lay reader, and chalice assistant at St. Margaret's Anglican Church. He's going to speak to us today on our topic of national security, of peace and conflict resolution, and looking at successes, challenges that we have to face through 2024. Rotarians and guests, please give a hand to our speaker, the Honorable Wayne Monroe.
Thank you very much for that abbreviated introduction. In this job, you get to listen to people say at length your accomplishments, and always grateful for a short intro. Bearing in mind the last virtue in that introduction, it behooves me then to start this short presentation with a gospel reading for you. And I'll read from Matthew 5, verse 9. And Christ on the Sermon of the Mount says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Now, we thought it so highly in our Constitution, and when I speak, I tell people our Constitution isn't unique in many aspects, except for the preamble. You will not find the preamble to our Constitution in any other. And so we take this business of being founded on Christian values seriously. And so in addressing this area and this subject matter of, let's be blunt about it, crime, I intend to speak to you from that perspective. Now, last night in Parliament, I read from an article in one of the dailies, September 3rd, 2013. I chose to do that because there are questions about people's consistency, They say you used to say this when you were in opposition, and now you're in government, you say something slightly different. That's always a cry. Well, this is what I said on the 3rd of September 2013, and we're talking then about crime and murder in particular. I'm reported as saying there is no silver bullet that can get rid of a generation of killers bred by society over the past 2 decades. And I was, on that occasion, the reporter says, defending police efforts to combat violent crime. And at that occasion, I indicated that public criticism of law enforcement are largely misinformed. And I said this, the issue in any country, small or large, is that you have resource issues, limited resources you have to deal with, education, health, policing. The question is, would it really be appropriate not to be directing resources to the homicide situation? And I'm recorded as saying this, the fact that the police aren't doing what we think they should be doing is because they are the professionals, and they're making decisions based on their intelligence and the reality of the situation. The police deal with the failure in society. After you've arrived at that point, where you are going to take someone's life, there is nothing the commissioner is going to say that is going to deter you. That was the position that I put over a decade ago in 2013, and that is how long this issue has been with us. And so I say that to say simply this, and perhaps I should end it out with what I said at the end, where I said it's a social situation, circumstance that we have, and we're going to have to, and we're going to have it for the next decade or so. There's no silver bullet. We raise these young killers, and they're going to be killing. That was my account in 2013. 10 years later, we still espouse the view and the position that we are responsible for all Bahamians in the Bahamas living and moving about with us. And so you'd have heard the Prime Minister, in putting forward the 5-point strategy, say that this is a whole of government, whole of society issue. And so when I go from place to place in this country, I often hear people ask, what y'all gonna do about crime? You see, that's the wrong focus, what y'all gonna do about crime. The question properly put from the position that the Prime Minister has advanced is what are we going to do about crime? You see, we want to depersonalize it. So everybody else is responsible for addressing crime other than us. So we say, what is the government going to do about crime? What is the school system going to do about crime? What are parents going to do with their children? What is the church going to do? All of it is an attempt to divorce ourselves from the issue that the scripture, the gospel speak to, of being peacemakers ourselves. And it is this administration's position that this is a problem that requires a whole of society approach. I say to people when I address them, you could go about your life saying, I will raise my children properly and I don't care about anything else. And you can do that. And one of the early murders in this term, if you can remember, was a young man in the Camp Road area, stellar student, 4.0 student, about to embark on an accounting career, and he was stabbed to death when he came here before he went back to the US by another child, another young man who wasn't properly socialized. So you can't go about this country saying, I will be concerned only with my own. I'm very proud that I was actually born on Ragged Island in the settlement of Duncantown, the only settlement, by the way, in Ragged Island, that I lived there for the first 4 years of my life. And even when we moved to the capital, back in the late 60s, early 70s, the attitude in this country was that everyone was responsible for every child. And so you had the experience that wherever you went in the community, you were subject to discipline and correction from any adult. That is where we came from. And in the late 60s, early 70s, we were having debates about whether the police should have guns. We were having that debate in the late 60s, the early 70s. That is no longer a debate. And we no longer live as we used to live. I give the account that when I was young, I used to go to church Monday. I used to go back to church Tuesday evening for Awana. I go to church Wednesday midday service. God help me if the church have something on Friday or Saturday, because I had to go back to that. And I went to church on Sunday 3 times. 9 o'clock for Sunday school, 11 o'clock for church, and back in the evening for evening church. Not because I personally liked church, but because I lived with my parents, and that was their rules. And back in those days, children were taught to do what they were told and obey rules. The challenge for us today is that spirit still alive in the Bahamas? And if it isn't, can we recapture it? But as Rotarians, what I want to put in your hearing today, since the question is, what can we do to address crime? I want to point out to you the part you can play in each of the 5 pillars of the strategy that the Prime Minister has laid out. The first limb, as you know, is prevention, because prevention is better than cure. And there are many ways as Rotarians that you probably already participate in this area as I listen to the report of some of your efforts, and that you may be able to engage more. So a big part of what we're missing is mentorship. Men to show young men and young boys how to become men. Ladies to show girls how to become ladies. Notice I didn't say how to become women, how to become ladies. That is an area that is sorely lacking. Any thought that this problem was limited to men have been dispelled. And so we need mentors all around. The example I hold up recently is young Father Scott Jupp, who was the victim of armed robbery at gunpoint of the church's car. But he, along with the rector of St. Matthew's and the vestry there, have launched a mentorship program called PrEP to mentor young people, male and female. That is what they are doing. Because it need not be anything earth-shattering, you know. People are looking for this big idea. Well, the big idea is it takes a village to raise a child, and how do you execute on that? So that's what Father Jupp did in response to being the victim of armed robbery. Recently, I had an occasion to meet with Andy and Nancy Knowles, Let's Swim Bahamas. They actually, when the little primary school students are being driven to the pool, they do memory verses with them in the bus. Teach them about values and discipline in the bus. They've called on the Defense Force, who have provided Defense Force divers to be coaches, to show the children discipline. I witnessed it, and this was the most organized set of young children I ever see. Come off the bus in a line, put their stuff down, go in the pool, get out of the pool. Discipline. Sorely lacking in the country today. They've determined to teach it, and they've asked for the help of government agency, and it is forthcoming. So I'm quite sure Rotary have its own programs. And when I open up for questions, you may find that I ask you as many questions as you ask me. And that'll be the cost to y'all of my appearance here today. You know, as a Casey, I used to be able to demand a very high fee. Now the only thing I can demand in this job will be a little interaction with you all for you all to give me information that may be useful. So that's prevention. We all know what that means. We have youth at risk. If you think you're a responsible Bahamian, it's for you to engage with youth at risk and show them the way. Or it's for you to engage with their parents. All of us can recall the case recently of the mother who left the 2 children unattended. But did we ever think, well, what was happening with this woman's neighbors? Did anybody ever step in to say, this woman may have an issue, this woman may have a problem, how can we assist? All of us who are parents, and you've heard that I have quite a number, right? Well, for number one, I had no training. There was no lesson called becoming a father. You have a child, and that's it. You have to deal with it. You have to fall back on your social network, your parents, your father, your mother, your aunts, your uncles. But there are no classes for becoming a father. Social services now offer parenting classes, usually when you've messed up at it. But before you become a parent, there's no class called being a parent. And so before we are overly critical of parents who aren't, in our view, living up to the standard, it behooves us to become involved and reach out and try to assist if we can. And so all of that is a part of prevention. The next pillar is policing. And you may not be a police officer, but the saying is very simple. If you see something, say something. Because in the Bahamas today, you know, you ever see all these videos that people are making of crime in progress, and seldom in them do you hear anyone say, call the police. They'll walk up, they'll make a full 3 to 5 minute video of somebody getting beaten in the street, somebody laying in the road dying, and seldom do you hear, call the police. The point is very simple for your involvement in this area. If you see something, say something. If you're afraid of doing it openly, you have Crime Stoppers. You have a number of ways to anonymously report. Moving on quickly to the third pillar, which is prosecution. You'll say, well, you have nothing to do with the court system unless you're a Clinton clerk or something. You have nothing to do with the court system. But you have a part to play in prosecutions. The witnesses in trials are ordinary people. So if you would have said something when you saw something, when it's time to show up now to make the law take its course, that is an obligation on you. Serious crimes. Murders are tried before juries. If you are not engaged in the criminal justice system, it is your job to be available as jurors. And I'll say here today, I do not support judge-alone trials for a very simple reason, you know. If you have a trial by a judge alone, the judge has to actually write a decision. So you saw in the Oscar Pistorius case in South Africa, that judge adjourned for about 6 weeks to write a judgment. So today, a trial finishes after the witnesses close and the judge sums up the next day, and the jury brings back a verdict. But in judge-alone trials, judges adjourn to write a judgment, and that's an ability for judgments to get backed up. And personally, as a lawyer, the more you write, the more there is for me to scrutinize, the more there is for me to extract a ground of appeal out of. So I don't support that, but not supporting it, that leaves the option to you as members of the public to do your civic duty when called upon to act as jurors. Then there is the element of punishment. And you may think, truly, you have nothing to do with punishment because you're not a prison officer or a corrections officer, as we call it today. But I'm here to tell you that we are now consulting on a new bill called the Conditional Release of Offenders Bill that will put in place some sentences to be served in the community. As a country, we imprison people at 10 times the rate of any of our CARICOM brothers or sisters. 10 times the rate when you look at it per capita. We intend to seek to make more use of sentences in the community. So for lower level offenses, you might get probation. The conditions of your release may call upon you to do something with a non-profit organization. And that will mean that we will require organizations who can step up to take that part of it. The whole concept is you shouldn't go to prison for short terms, because we don't even try to rehabilitate you if you go to prison for less than 24 months. It's too short a period to have a sentence plan. But we could release you, and I suppose this is where the debate on the Bail Act comes up, on conditions that you do A, B, C, and if you don't do it, then there are consequences, which means, of course, that when you breach the conditions, there has to be consequences. A suspended sentence would mean you go directly to prison if you breach the condition. But as an organization, Rotary, in your private avocations, you may be persons who would be called upon to be a part of somebody's sentence in the community, and that would require cooperation from you. And then there's rehabilitation, the final pillar. And again, you have a part to play in that. Currently, we have a system of remission that we hope to replace with parole. I wouldn't go into the details unless in the questions you ask, but the concept of parole will mean a parolee must have a job. That means that as a public, you have to be willing to receive these people back into the society. 95% or more of them will come back into society regardless of what length of a sentence they get. If a young man gets a sentence of 40 years in prison, at the age of 30, he will be released under our current system when he is about 56, 57 years old. So he's coming back out. And the question will be, set aside the rehabilitative programs that we've put in place at the prison. We have psychiatrists, psychologists, we're bringing in teachers. We can do all of that marvelously in the facility. When they get out, they will interface with you, the public, and how you accept them back may well determine how they continue to live. And so there's a part to play for all of you in every limb of the 5-point strategy. And before I close and open for questions, since I heard banding about talk about accountants, you're all wasting lawyers, you're all everywhere. But since I heard that strong pushback, the Correctional Services Review Board, which is the board responsible for oversight of the prison, examining prison conditions, hearing complaints, and administering what is popularly called the work scheme, people who are let out of prison to work in the day and come back in the evening. A mandatory member of the board must be somebody from the accounting profession. And with that clapping, I need an accountant to be on the Correctional Services Review Board. And this is one area that a good accountant Rotarian can do some public service with regard rehabilitation. I conclude as I started, In 2013, I said, we bred these young killers. We're still doing it. We haven't stopped. We have to have the will to stop. But as the Prime Minister says, it's a whole of society effort. And so let not our question be, what are you doing to address crime? Let our question be, what are we doing? What are we going to do to address crime? Only then will it be truly an all of society effort. And if you need a selfish reason to do it, Matthew 5:9 gives you that selfish reason, because it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." With that, I thank you for your attention, and I would open the floor to questions. In my address, I pointed out some things that would be self-evident, To move from a debate about whether any police should have a gun to an era where nobody would suggest that every police shouldn't have a gun all of the time tells you where we have traveled from in our lifetime. So we ain't talking about ancient history, you know. I was born in '68. So I feel old. People say I'm relatively young, but in my lifetime, I have seen that. You talk about what some would say is the moral decay. I hear some accounts that says that a lot of what we call moral decay was around in the 60s and the 70s as well. So that may be a more subjective thing. The failure to have a birth rate that is at a sufficient level, that actuaries tell us that that will endanger any pension, national pension program, are issues that have to do with the way that we change how we live. Back in the day, a woman would have 10 children. You have to sneak a woman for her to have more than 2 children today. So at the end of the day, some things have changed. Now, whether or not you characterize it as the right direction, this is what is happening. And you have debate about both things. I have a good Anglican priest who tells me, why am I encouraging people to have a lot of children and they can't afford them? On the other hand, I say, when I was growing up, my mother didn't work, and we made do with what we had. We didn't go on vacations, we didn't go here, we didn't go there. So some things have happened as a country. The correct question is this: if we were determined that we ought to change direction, the first thing you do sensibly is to determine what that could be. So I'm from Ragged Island. My uncle we used to get, when they ask you something and you say, I think, you used to get chastised for that, because they say, I ain't asking what you think, I'm asking you for a fact. One of my uncles used to tell me, I can't think how much gas I need to reach to New Providence, I have to know. So before you embark on this move, you have to determine what is realistic. So if you were to ask, can we go back to the day when the majority of women did not work and were homemakers? I would tell you the answer to that is probably no. So as much as you might yearn for that as a man or a woman, if it's unlikely to happen, then it's unlikely to happen. So we have to make decisions about where we are and where we can reasonably be. Home ownership is a vexing thing, because property is expensive even though there's a lot of it. There is no incentive, if you're a Bahamian, to sell property until you're ready to, because there's no tax accruing on it. So you could just hold it and speculate if you're a Bahamian, because there's no cost for speculation. So all of these things that affect what happens in the country, we can sit down and have a reasonable look at it to say, where can we arrive to from where we are? This current administration believes in that, and so we have programs. Are we going to build enough homes for everyone who needs it? Probably not. We're going to do our part. And for a little political plug, I would say we've built infinitely more homes than our predecessors because they didn't build any. So if you build one, that's infinitely more than the people who came before. But the bigger question is to make property affordable. And that's a different issue. And that's where you engage on issues like diamonds aren't really rare, you know. But the bears control the price of diamonds by what supply they release and their pricing. So that is an issue that when you start to talk about questions like that, there are social implications that you make a determination on. The former Prime Minister in the House yesterday, one may say irresponsibly or otherwise, says there's a report of 2 rapes in the Bahamas, and particularly one in a hotel, until you find out that the allegation of the rape in the hotel is a 61-year-old Canadian accused of raping an 80-year-old Canadian. And it happened to have happened in a hotel in the Bahamas, but the actual victim and perpetrator, neither is a Bahamian. So the reality of what you may perceive and fear you may get is a different matter. You also heard in the House, the former Prime Minister run on about the current licensing policy of the government, right? You will know that that is something just to address a fear of crime, because statistics tell us that the vast majority of people who will have a licensed firearm of any description will never ever have to use it for any purpose unless they go hunting. But if it makes you feel safer, there may be some value to it. But again, that's a different topic in this country because we don't have the same rules and culture as America does on that. But again, the fear of crime and the actual risk to yourself may not align.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for taking those questions. We'll invite our past President, Pedro Delaney, to give the thanks.
On behalf of the Rotary Club of West Nassau, the fellow Rotarians and guests here today, I'd like to thank you for taking time away from your busy schedule to stop by, speak to us, and explain the pillars of the administration's strategy for combating crime. And also, a good takeaway is that the fight against crime is a society's fight, and we all have a role to play in that fight. So I'd like to take this opportunity to present you with a certificate just as evidence of your being here, and at the same time to provide you with a gift that we have for you.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a professional at the photo taking.